Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Gretchen and today I'm back with another reading recap. It's been a little while since I have checked in. I think it's been about 10 or 11 days, and since we last spoke I have completed 8 books and I am still in the midst of some carryovers that I talked about during my last reading recap, and then also there are some new ones that I have started and there are some new library holds and books that I have recently acquired that I plan to start soon. So there's a lot to talk about, so let's just go ahead and jump right into it. So as I mentioned, there were 8 books that I finished this past week or so, and some of those books were books that I had previously let you know that I was reading in my last video, and then there are some that I was not planning on reading at all that I managed to pick up and finish since we last spoke as well. So let's go ahead and start to talk about those carryovers. So I think the last time we spoke I had mentioned that I was almost done with Crooked Plow, and I did manage to finish this. This is a fantastic book. It's one that I highly recommend, and because it was a long-listed and eventually shortlisted book for the International Booker, there will be a full-length review coming out for this, so I won't say too much about it, except that I really did enjoy my time with this, and I'm looking forward to talking more in depth about it in that upcoming video. And another book prize book that I was reading for the Women's Prize for nonfiction is the long-listed title Matrescence on Pregnancy, Childbirth, and Motherhood by Lucy Jones. And this was a book that actually was pretty surprising for me. I was not sure going into this because it really focuses on motherhood and pregnancy. I just, not being a mother, thought that this would be a book that was kind of a bore for me, or it wasn't a book that I could relate to. And I think that Lucy Jones did an amazing job of being inclusive with this book, and I did enjoy it. I'll talk more in depth obviously when I do my full-length review for this, but once again, another book prize book that I did end up enjoying. And I believe another carryover that I had from my last week, I know that I talked about it. I'm not sure if it was a book I was about to start or one that I had started, but I also finished Orbital by Samantha Harvey. And this book is, I've honestly had a pretty good time with my reading lately. I feel like a broken record. I keep saying that I enjoyed these books, but that's always a good thing. So this book was a book that I went into not really knowing a whole lot about it. It was kind of a buzz book toward the end of last year, the beginning of this year, and I had it on hold at my library for a while, and it just so happened to come in, so I figured why not take the time to prioritize it, and I'm really glad that I did. This book was about, basically you have 6 people that are in a space station and they are orbiting Earth, and we have 4 astronauts and 2 cosmonauts from Russia, and basically we're following 16 different orbits, and during each of those orbits, and that's how the chapters are laid out, we are learning a little bit about their life in the space station. We're learning a little bit about each of their lives back at home on Earth, and we're also learning about how they are reflecting on the situation that they're in, how they came to be on that space station, and all of the thoughts and feelings that they're having as they are floating in space and they are looking down on Earth and experiencing this amazing thing every single day. And I really enjoyed learning about all of those things. This is a book that is not plot heavy. It's not even really truly, I think, a character study either. It's just a book that allowed me to read it and reflect on my own feelings on how I would feel in a situation like that. And it's a book that will make you feel, once again, very small and like that speck in the universe. And it makes you realize both at the same time how important things are, but also how minimal things are in the grand scheme of things. And I really did enjoy my time with it. It's a book that kind of stopped me at times where I would read a thought by one of the astronauts and I would just reflect on it for a little bit. And I really love books that can kind of stop you in your tracks and just make you think for a second before you continue. And I will also say, I do have to think about this, but obviously we are coming up on the Booker Prize. They will announce their long list in July. So obviously I will be coming out with a predictions video. And this book, I was thinking as I was reading it, this definitely has Booker potential. I'm not sure if it's actually going to end up on my official predictions list, but that seed has been planted, and I definitely think that this could be a book that I could see ending up on that overall long list. So another book that I had mentioned I was going to potentially get started on my last video was The Gunkle Abroad by Stephen Rowley. And this book was one that I was really excited for. I had read The Guncle a few years ago, and I was so shocked at how I went into that book thinking that it would be kind of a piece of fluff, just one of those books that you read for entertainment's sake alone. And I ended up coming away from that book in tears. I loved the characters. I loved everything about it. I learned a lesson. I was able to emotionally connect with the characters. It also made me reflect on my own life, so I was emotionally processing things of my own as I was reading it. And I've always appreciated Stephen Rowley's writing for that he can take very serious things and put that humorous spin on them, but still make you feel things and come out on the other side both entertained and also satisfy you emotionally at the same time. So this book I highly recommend if you did read The Guncle and you enjoyed that. I think I may have even liked this book a little more. This book takes our characters to Italy, where they are going for their father's wedding. So we learn about these children's coping with getting a new stepmother. We learn about the children's relationship with their uncle and how the uncle is going through something as well. And it's just, once again, it's a quick, cozy read, and it's gonna tug at your heartstrings, and I do highly recommend it. The next book that I finished is a book called Sociopath by Patric Gagne. And this was a book that, even though I really enjoyed it and I thought it was a good book, I struggled with this book because it was a tough read. It was very uncomfortable to read at times, and it's one of those books that really impacted me viscerally and not necessarily in a good way. So this book is a piece of nonfiction, and it follows Patric and her coming to terms with her diagnosis of being a sociopath. And she learns this at a fairly young age. Like, she noticed the signs and symptoms, and when she was in college, she really started to learn more and more about the condition. So she kind of dedicated her life to helping others come to terms with that disorder diagnosis, and also try to destigmatize the word sociopath or making people more aware of the disorder so that everybody is not always villainized whenever they hear that term. She also talks in depth about the disorder itself, the symptoms, the treatments. She talks about how much more there is to learn about the disorder in itself. And as she's going through this, it's following her through her life. So we learn about her as a child, her growing up in her family. There's just a whole lot going on. We're there with her when she meets her husband, and we learn about how her husband treats her and manages his expectations for the relationship. And it was very intimate and it was very personal. And I think partly that's why I felt pretty uncomfortable sometimes reading this book, because I do feel like the author was really putting herself out there and she was being completely vulnerable with some of those things. And she presented the ugliest sides of her, and she shared very, very horrifying things that she has done in the past, and learning about those things was really difficult to hear, not only because they were horrific things, but the fact that she had to go through those things, and it was, you know, very tough for her to be the person that was doing those things, and the way that she felt about it or didn't feel about it, and how it was impacting other people. And it was a very honest and raw book. And I think sometimes she did present things with a lot of humor and humility, so that made the book very entertaining as well. I will say that there are definitely some trigger warnings in here. One very specifically for animal cruelty. There was a part that I almost decided not to move forward with it because I was afraid that there was going to be more stuff like that throughout the book, and thankfully there wasn't. What I had read was the worst of it, and just know that going in. But it is a really interesting book, and it made me look at that disorder completely differently. You always think of sociopaths as being, you know, criminal, and that they're doing things almost on purpose, or that they're incapable of actually feeling things or having emotions, or incapable of friendships and love and things like that. And she really does a great job of busting some of those myths and also validating some of them. So I think that if anybody is at all interested in that type of behavior and wondering how people with a disorder like that cope and live their day to day, I think that this is going to be a really good read for you. So another book that I had mentioned on my previous video was a book hold that had just come into the library, and it was called The Curse of Pietro Houdini, and this was by Derek B. Miller. And I ended up reading that book, and I really ended up enjoying it in the end. Now, is it my favorite book of all time? No, but it was a very interesting story. It kept my interest the entirety of it. And it's a book that, although it is set during World War II, it doesn't fall into all of those historical World War II type books that I so often find myself reading and having a hard time getting through. Anytime I think of historical fiction, I always think of World War II for some reason, because there are so many. You're spoiled for choice when it comes to books that are set in World War II. But this one was kind of different. It didn't focus necessarily on the war or the battles, but it focused on the idea of preserving things and protecting things from the war, being people and art, both of those were being protected. This is a book set later in the war in August of 1943, and it takes place in Italy. And we have our main character. His name is Massimo, and he is 14 years old, and he is attacked in this Italian village at the base of this mountain, and it's a place called Monte Cassino. And while he is there, and after the attack, he is found by this man named Pietro Houdini. So Pietro Houdini, he takes the child and goes to this monastery that is in the mountains. And while he is there, Massimo realizes that part of Houdini's plan is that he is going to help save a lot of the art that is in the monastery, because they are afraid that it is either going to be taken by the Germans or it is going to be destroyed. So they come up with this elaborate plan to get 3 of these Renaissance paintings out of the abbey and to safety. So it's kind of a little art heist. There are many different twists and turns. This was a book, I don't usually get too surprised by plot twists and things like that. I can usually see them coming. There was one plot twist in here that completely took me by surprise. I did not see it coming at all. So this book kept me on my toes. It was entertaining, and to me it was kind of refreshing and a little bit of a different twist than those typical World War II books that I, have read so many of in the past. So I really did enjoy this one, and if you do like historical fiction, especially one set during World War II, I think that this is a book that you would enjoy as well. So the next book that I finished is a book called While We Were Burning, and this is by Sarah Koffi. And what intrigued me about this book was the tagline, where they had claimed that this book was a mix between Parasite and Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reed. So for any of you out there that have not watched the movie Parasite, highly, highly recommend it. It is a fantastic movie. It was one of my favorites from a few years ago. So as soon as I heard that it had kind of Parasite vibes, and also Such a Fun Age was a very interesting book. It wasn't my favorite book, but I definitely thought that it was unique and original, and I can see the merits on why everybody enjoyed that book. And I liked the plot of it, so knowing that this book kind of had those elements to it, I was all in. However, it didn't deliver a good read for me, but it definitely delivered on those comparisons. So I definitely think that I can see where the Parasite vibes are. I can see how this falls in line with Such a Fun Age, but at the end of the day, it didn't really hit the mark for me. So basically, this book follows our one of our main characters. Her name is Elizabeth, and at the beginning of the book, she has this friend named Patricia, and by the end of the first chapter, we learn that Patricia at a Halloween party has killed herself. So Elizabeth doesn't believe that Patricia killed herself. She believes that it was suspicious. And then we kind of move forward where she's trying to process her grief of losing her friend and trying to get her life back together. And her husband suggests that they hire an assistant for her to help her with all of this. And that's where I'll stop because I don't want to give too many spoilers away, but it was an interesting enough read. It just wasn't my favorite. I think that this is definitely a book that you could have as a beach read. I think it has that perfect vibe for a fast-paced book where you don't really have to think too hard, and a book that you can close and finish the last page and just file it away as read and never have to think about it again. But, you know, did I enjoy my time with it? Yes. Will I forget about it? Yes. Will I read it again? No. But still, I'm glad I read it. So the next book that I finished is a book called Material World, The 6 Raw Materials That Shape Modern Civilization. And this is a book by Ed Conway. And the six raw materials that were mentioned are salt, oil, sand, lithium, copper, and iron. So basically, the author goes through each of those materials and he talks about how they are made, how they come into being, and he also talks about our dependence on them and how our day-to-day world kind of revolves around these 6 things. And if any of these items were to not be available to us, how our world would literally screech to a halt and we would just be in absolute chaos, and how dependent we truly are on these things. I really enjoyed this book. I think the author did a really good job of not only providing the science, but also providing us with a lot of anecdotal stories. And he talks about each of those different materials and how they're produced or how they are acquired. And I learned a lot from this book. The one thing that I will say is it was a little dry. One thing that I always like to have in my nonfiction, especially things that are science-based where they're telling you a lot of factual things and you're learning a lot, I always like that to be sprinkled with a little bit of humor. This to me was kind of dry material. It didn't seem like it had a lot of charm or wit in it, but I could also not be picking up on that humor. It could be in there, it's just not my type of humor, so maybe I glossed over it or I wasn't picking up on it, but it doesn't change the fact that this is a really interesting book and I did learn so much from it. And I think the biggest takeaway that I had from this is we are dependent on things that you don't necessarily think of as being, you know, vital. Obviously, you know, we know the importance of oil and we know the importance of salt, but when you get into different things about copper and lithium, and like lithium for batteries, like I am filming this on a camera right now that has a lithium battery. If we no longer had access to lithium, what would we do? Copper and sand and those things that eventually create silicon chips and, you know, the fiber optics that we run all of our digital communication on. It's absolutely crazy how much we depend on these things, and they're things that you wouldn't necessarily think of off the top of your head. And I think that the author did a really good job of educating the reader on each of those, talking about how those things are made and come into fruition, and also what would happen if those things were to be depleted. So definitely an interesting read, not for everybody, but if you like those science-based books where you're gonna learn a lot to impress your friends or answer Jeopardy questions, this is a great book to read. So that's it for the books that I finished. I do have a couple books that I am currently reading at the moment. I still have, like I said, some of those carryovers that I've been talking about, my recent recaps for the Women's Prize and the International Booker. I won't go into details with those, but some of the new books that I am reading are Brotherless Night by Ganeshananthan. This is the final book that I have to finish for the Women's Prize for Fiction. The Women's Prize for Fiction winner is going to be announced, I believe, on the 13th, so next week. I will be putting a predictions video together once I finish this one, and then also I'll be putting one out for the Women's Prize for Nonfiction as well, because both of those prize winners will be announced on the same day. But this book is going well so far. So I haven't read read enough of the book to have formed a solid opinion on it yet, but I will say I can definitely see the merits of it and why it ended up making the short list. The writing is absolutely beautiful, and all I know at this point is I'm gonna have a really tough decision to make when I get to thinking about who my winner prediction will be, because all of the books, or several of the books I should say, are really amazing, and this one I can definitely see has that potential to be a really good book. So wish me luck predicting that winner. And then the other book that I am actively reading is kind of a controversial book at the moment. So for those of you that don't know, they announced the Pulitzer Prize winner about a month ago, and it just so happened to be Night Watch by Jayne and Phillips, and there is not a lot of love going around for this book at the moment. So I've had this copy. I purchased this copy when it was longlisted for the National Book Award, and I have been meaning to get to it, and then when it didn't win, I just kind of put it to the side. But when it won the Pulitzer, I immediately put the hold in for the audio, and it just came in. So I started this just to see what all the hate buzz was about. I definitely know that this was a book that was a surprise. It kind of came out of left field. I think all of us were expecting there to be a bigger name announced for the Pulitzer winner. I know personally, I was thinking that The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store by James McBride would be a finalist. I figured North Woods by Daniel Mason would have been a finalist, and we really had a very unknown list of finalists for the Pulitzer this year. And then for this to take the win, I think that all of us were kind of expecting this fantastic book that was just going to absolutely blow all of our minds. But I'm about 50 pages in, and I'm not seeing that level of spectacular yet, although the writing is really pretty and it's written well. Maybe I'm just not far enough into it, but even only being 50 some pages in, I'm not seeing this as being written like a Pulitzer level book, but we'll see. I still have I think I'm just over 20%, so we still have a good bit of time to go. I will, of course, update you when I finish this, but yeah, I'm really curious to see what happens at the end of this. And also, for any of you that maybe have read this already, do you think that it deserved the Pulitzer? But yeah, so we'll see what happens with this one. And another book that I am in the middle of reading that I don't have with me at the moment is The Lady Waiting by Magdalena Zyzak, and I am enjoying it so far. This is a book that is about a young Polish woman that is living in LA. One day she picks up a hitchhiker, and that hitchhiker ends up turning out to be this affluent woman that is kind of a whirling dervish. She just is all over the place. She is very eccentric. She kind of takes our main character under her wing and unknowingly puts her into these precarious situations which lead to art theft and like affairs, and it's very messy, and I'm a little over halfway done with it at the moment, and it is entertaining. I am enjoying myself, and we'll see how it comes together in the end. And lastly, I just want to talk about some of those books that you'll probably see me talking about in the next few weeks. So these are either library holds that I just had come in, or they are for upcoming projects or read-alongs or things like that. So just to give you a heads up of what to expect. So the first one is Challenger by Higginbotham. This book book was one of my anticipated releases for June. I am really looking forward to getting to this. I don't actively have a nonfiction going right now, so this hold just came in from my library, so I will likely start this one very soon. So one of the other books that's on my radar and I should be starting soon is another library hold that just came in, and that is Great Expectations by Vinson Cunningham. This book has been on my radar for a while. I've heard a lot of buzz about it, but I honestly haven't heard anybody's opinions on it, or I haven't seen any reviews for it yet, but it sounds really interesting. It says, when David first hears the senator from Illinois speak, he feels deep ambivalence. Intrigued by the senator's idealistic rhetoric, David also wonders how he'll balance the fervent hopes and inevitable compromises it will take to become the United States' first Black president. Great Expectations is about David's 18 months working for the senator's presidential campaign. Along the way, David meets a myriad of people who raise a set of questions about history, art, race, religion, and fatherhood that force David to look at his own life anew and come to terms with his identity as a young Black man and father in America. So it sounds like it's going to be very interesting. There's a lot to unpack here, and I also know that this is eligible for the Booker Prize, so I think that this is going to be one of those books that as I'm reading it, I'm going to be, ruminating over whether or not I think that this is a potential long list option for that prize as well. Another book I'm probably going to be starting within the next few days is Glorious Exploits by Ferdia Lennon. This is a book that has been on my radar for a while. The audio hold has just come in, so I will definitely be getting to this within the next few weeks. I think that this book is going to be funny. I am looking forward to something lighthearted. I think that this is going to be a good pick for a summer read for me, and I am absolutely obsessed with this cover. And then the last book that I'm going to be starting within the next week, and I will for sure be starting this for the next week because this is for a read along. So today is Sunday, and part of my Sunday ritual is that I will get up early in the morning and I will catch up on some YouTube videos from all of the booktubers that I follow and love. And one of those is Jess from Stalking Kafka. Love her channel, and she mentioned on her latest video, her June TBR, that she's going to be hosting a read along for East of Eden by John Steinbeck, and I was so excited when she mentioned that. I have been wanting to get to this book for such a long time, and I have always wanted to get to some of his bigger novels. I think I've pretty much read most of his shorter novels / novellas, but East of Eden and The Grapes of Wrath are the two that I have yet to tackle, and there's no time like the present, and I absolutely love the idea of doing this classic with a read along, and I'm really looking forward to that. I think the read along starts on, don't quote me, but I think it's June 13th maybe. I'm probably wrong about that, but regardless, I should be starting with this within the next week or so, and it's gonna be done in smaller chunks, and I love the idea of that. Sometimes I think why I push books away is they just seem very daunting, and they seem like they're going to be a lot to digest, and I like having other reads going at the same time, and reading these big chunkster books can often be intimidating, but breaking it down is always helpful, and I love the idea of tackling classics in this way. So really looking forward to this, and I can't wait to get started on it. And that's it for my reading recap. There's a lot going on. There's a lot still to come. We have the Booker Prize right around the corner. I need to double check, but I looked last week and I didn't think that they had announced the day that they would announce the long list for the Booker Prize, but I think that it is definitely sometime in July. Not sure of the exact date yet, but I really do need to start thinking about my predictions video. That's probably gonna come out later in June, probably toward the end of the month. I'll probably have some reaction discussion on the Women's Prize for both fiction and nonfiction. There are also some other project books that I have that are coming up that I'll talk a little more about when I get there. Summer is in full swing. I have more downtime than I typically do at the moment, so I'm hoping that I can get a lot of reading done. And until we read again, bye.